Sometimes for problems like this, it might be possible to actually factor more than once. So this problem here is one we're actually going to do factoring twice. Now, the first thing that we're going to look at with this problem is you want to look at all three of the numbers to see if there is a common factor with the numbers themselves. Now, usually there aren't for these kind of problems. Typically, like previous problems we've done before, uh, there may not be something that's common here. However, this one does have a common value. All these numbers are divisible by 3. So my first step is to factor out a 3. So if I do that, I'll just divide all these numbers by 3. So I get x squared. 24 divided by 3 is 8x. Negative 99 divided by 3 is negative 33. So that's the first factoring that we did the first round through. But now we want to see, can this be factored again? So we're going to look at the part that's inside the parentheses. We want to look to see if we can find two numbers that multiply to make negative 33, but add to be 8. All right, so I have negative 33, and I want to find the factors. I have 1 and 33, and I have 3 and 11. Now, 3 and 11, it is possible for us to get 8 out of that. Remember, this is negative 33, so one of these is going to have to be positive, and one of these factors has to be negative. If I want to get a positive 8, that means that the larger number needs to be positive and the smaller one needs to be negative. So this combination will work because negative 3 times 11 is negative 33. And then negative 3 plus 11 would be 8. Okay, so now we're not going to use the grouping method on this because there's a 1 in front of the x squared. So this is the reason why I'm not using the grouping method in this case. I'm just going to go directly into the two different sets of parentheses on this one. So I'm going to have x minus 3, and I have x plus 11. Notice that the 3 outside that I factored originally, that needs to come down and be part of your answer. So in this case, we factored completely is what this would mean, because I factored it down as far as I could possibly go. Now, it's often helpful to factor out the common factor no matter what, because it's going to make any kind of other factoring you do after that easier. For instance, if I want to do this by grouping method, I actually could do that if I wanted to. But then I'd be doing 3 times 99. That's a really large number, and it might take a long time to come out with all the list of factors. I probably have to have a calculator and everything else for something like that. By factoring out the 3 ahead of time, it actually makes the number smaller. So then it makes further factoring easier. So you should always be looking for common factors in these problems to see if you can factor them out first. Now, the next one we have here has a negative that's in front. And so if you have a negative in front, it's strongly recommended to first factor out the negative. So the negative 1 in this case is going to be the common factor. So I'm going to factor out a negative 1. Okay, now you don't have to put the negative 1 there. You could just put a negative, but I'm just going to show you a negative 1 there just so you know what it is I'm actually factoring by. Negative 5x squared divided by negative 1 is a positive 5x squared. 12x divided by negative 1 is negative 12x. 9 divided by negative 1 is minus 9. So I've just basically factored out a negative from that. Now, the part that's left over inside the parentheses, that's the part I can now do with the grouping method. So I'm going to take 5 times negative 9, and that's negative 45. I'm going to write down all the factors of that. So I have 1 and 45. I have 3 and 15. And of course, I have 5 and 9. I want to find the combination that gives me negative 12. So the only one that's going to work is 3 and 15. The negative needs to go with the 15 because my result has to be negative. So I'll put the negative with the larger number there. I have a negative here, so I don't have to put the 1. I'm just going to put negative out front. I have 5x squared, and I have, it doesn't matter which order you put this in. So I'll put the negative 15x first, but again, it doesn't really matter which order you want to put that in. So I'm going to put negative 15 first and the 3 second, but again, I could have switched those. It's fine. So With this, I want to factor out the first two. So when I do that here, let me go ahead and put a bracket around this whole thing with the negative out front, just so we don't get confused by the grouping symbols we have. The first two, the common factor is a 5x. 5x squared divided by 5x is just x. Negative 15x divided by 5x is negative 3. For these two, I'm going to factor out a positive 3. 3x divided by 3 is x. Negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3. I have a negative. The one that repeats, I'm going to put that first. So that's going to be the x minus 3. And then if I get rid of these two parenthesis parts, what I have left is 5x plus 3. And so that would be considered fully factored. I have the negative that just goes along for the ride all the way down to the bottom. And then I have these two things left over. Let's do one more where we have to factor out a common factor first. Okay. This one, again, you want to look at if there's something that's common. And if I look at all three of these, what I notice is that all three of these are divisible by 4. So that's the first step I'm going to do is factor out a 4. When we do that, we get x squared plus 3x. The negative 72 divided by 4 is negative 18. So that's the first step. We factor out the 4. Now, the next thing would be to factor this part inside. Now, again, we don't have to use grouping on this problem because there's a 1 in front. The only time you have to use the grouping method like we did up above is if the number in front of the x squared is not a 1. Okay, if it's not a 1, then you need to try and use the grouping method for that. But in this case, there's a 1 in front of the x squared, so I will just look for two numbers that multiply to make negative 18, but add to be 3. So let's do that over here. I have negative 18. So, of course, negative 18 means one of these numbers would be positive and one of them has to be negative. I have 1 and 18. I have 2 and 9. I have 3 and 6. Okay, so those are all the different factors that multiply to make positive 18. I want to find the combination that allows me to get a positive 3. Well, that's going to be 3 and 6. And so since I need that number to be positive, I want the larger number to be positive and the smaller one is going to be negative. So now I have a negative next to the 3. So for this one, it's just going to turn into these two sets of parentheses because there's a 1 in front. I'm not using grouping method here. So I have an x and an x there for both of those. And it doesn't matter which order I put these in, but I'll do a minus 3 and a plus 6. So if I were to multiply all this together, I should get the same thing that I started with. So you would multiply this part out first, and you would get this because I would get x squared. I would get positive 6 minus 3 is a positive 3x. Negative 3 times 6 is negative 18. And then I would go proceed from here to multiply all these by 4. And I would get the same thing that I started with. So this here that I have would be the factored completely. Notice the 4 just stays there all the way down as I go through.